Hello there. Welcome back. And I want to get into exit strategy about when it's time to sell. But before I do that, I want to talk about the fact that every time that I deal with an investor, I talk about exit strategy up front. Because even if an investor says, well, I'm never going to sell, and my children are going to inherit the property, I go, well, unforeseen things happen. You can lose your job, you can get a divorce, you can have health issues. All three, and something may have something that determines maybe I need to sell at that point. I'm a cancer survivor, for instance, and I didn't expect to get cancer. And when I got the diagnosis, I went, well, what do I do? I mean, am I going to live or I'm not going to live? It's a serious thing. I didn't sell anything, but I got great care and I'm still here. That's important, but those are the kind of things that can happen to you. And that may make a decision a little bit harder about whether to buy that property if the exit strategy is not there. It's an indicator. If there's not a good exit strategy in the beginning about what happens 5, 7, 10 years, 20 years down the road, then, that may not be the property that you really want to buy. But let's get into the more positive stuff here about, why you might want to sell a property. So, let's start with this. If you do sell the property, taxes are involved if you sell the property outright. We're going to be talking more about 1031 tax-deferred exchanges. So one of the things you need to know if you're going to sell the property and just sell it outright is there is a basis for taxes. Now, your CPA has been computing this. It's based on, certain things like improvements that you put into, repairs you put into, losses you've carried forward, whatever it happens to be. There's going to be a basis for your taxes. Then at that point, remember we talked about the 27.5-year depreciation schedule that the IRS gives you. That's what they say is the usable life of a home to them. Cool. But they want you to pay 25% of that back if you want to sell this thing outright. So then that is going to adjust your basis again, because the next thing that they want is capital gains. Well, the nice thing about capital gains is it still should be less than what you would pay in terms of ordinary taxes. But these two types of taxes have to be paid if you're going to sell the property outright. And so you need to understand that from a proceeds point of view, you need to plan for part of that money. Your CPA will tell you how much is going to go to the IRS. But there's something called a 1031 tax-deferred exchange, which is fantastic. I think it's fantastic because it is a small family called the Starker family that actually won against the big old IRS. They wanted to be able to exchange like-kind property, sell something, buy something, and not have to pay taxes as long as they reinvest. And they won. The IRS never has been happy with it. And they set some pretty strict rules for you in terms of how it has to happen. But it is there, and it does allow you to sell the property and not have to pay those two types of taxes that we talked about. It's what's called a like-kind exchange. So in other words, it doesn't mean that you have a single family, you got to buy a single family, a short-term rental, you got to buy a short-term rental. No, it can be anything that they consider a like-kind exchange. It can be an apartment complex. It can be a duplex or quadruplex. It's all sorts of things. It's commercial, it's residential. It's maybe even land involved that you may be leasing out to someone to run their cattle. You want to sell the land. Consult with your CPA about making sure the IRS doesn't go, this sounds a little fishy to me. But normally people exchange residential for residential, commercial for commercial. And you got to invest at least the price that you got for the property. Let's use that $300,000. You got to buy at least $300,000 worth of properties. People typically buy more than one, so that's not a problem. So you need to do that, and you need to invest all your money. So if you have $150,000 proceeds and you don't want to pay any taxes, you have to reinvest $150,000. Now, they do allow you to separate it out. So if you want to invest $125,000 in new property and not pay taxes, and then pay taxes on $25,000, this is the decision that you make before closing. But if you don't want to pay taxes, you reinvest all of that. Then there's a third-party exchanger. And title companies around the United States have really, really good exchange companies. We know really fine exchange companies. And the importance of this is in a contract, the language for a 1031 has to be in there Because there's the moment in time, a nanosecond, when money is being exchanged out of the exchanger. Remember, you can't touch this money at all if you don't want to pay taxes. But for a nanosecond, neither buyer or seller owns the property. It's basically a technicality. It is no big deal. They're not going to keep the money. But that's why it has to be in contracts that that's the case. But no big deal. A good exchanger will be found by a good specialist or title company. Then there's something called a reverse exchange. I do not recommend this to you. It is very expensive and it is convoluted. There's a lot of things that have to be set up that doesn't have to be set up with a simple exchange. There is a cost involved on a simple exchange, but you sell the property, then you buy properties. That's normal exchange. Reverse exchange is when you buy property, then you sell the property. And you have a pretty confident feeling you can do it. The time I see this being done is when people have expensive commercial stuff, like you have a $20 million, property that you're selling, but you find this heck of a deal on a $30 million property. You don't want to lose it. You do a reverse exchange. You pay $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, no big deal. So this is why I typically tell people do not do a reverse exchange. I just want to make you aware of the fact that it exists. So let's go into now, why would you want to sell other than the fact of something bad happening? Well, some people keep their properties for a long time. They've used up all of their depreciation for those 27.5 years, and now they're in a taxable event in terms of their positive cash flow. Maybe paid off at that point, and they go, I don't want to pay taxes. So what I'm going to do is sell it, buy more properties, not pay any taxes, expand my wealth. So that's one way. Now, the second way is, what if you reach your appreciation limit? There's an affordability index in every city. And so there comes a point where it just kind of goes on the upper end of that, and it can't go much farther. And what you'd rather do is find a more affordable market that's really up and coming. And so you sell at a high, and maybe you can buy at a low. Timing is hard, but it's done all the time. And remember, you can invest in all 50 states. So if you find something in Nashville that looks good, or in Omaha that looks good, and you want to sell your property in Austin, you can do that, and you can go ahead and do that once you feel like that you've kind of reached that limit or close to that limit. Or you've just found some excellent buys. You find some place where, my God, this is incredible. I mean, I have got to buy this, but I've got to sell in order to do it. It's another reason. Now, here's another reason to do it, and this is a negative reason. It's underperforming. Maybe when you bought it, everything was really, really good. But all of a sudden, it's gone crazy. Investors are streaming in. And now you have 25, 30% investment properties in that neighborhood. You have 6 months of vacancy or more. Your rents go down $300, and I'm making a really bad case here, but sometimes that may happen. And if that's the case, you go, well, the appreciation is there. An occupant will buy this at this price. So therefore, what I want to do is go from an underperforming property and go into something that is performing well. That's another reason to do it. Or there comes a time when properties just have too much maintenance. They get old, they get used. And so I've had this situation recently where I've sold a few properties this year where somebody says, let's exchange the old for the new. And that can be a really good reason to do that. So those are some takeaways on reasons why you might want to sell an investment property. And again, remember, I think it's an integral part of the strategy in buying in the first place. Bad things happen. You want to make sure that you can get out without putting any money out of your pocket and take some cash you might need. Or these other reasons that say, man, it is really, really time to sell. Let's move on. Let's use this tax-deferred exchange, for instance, and let's buy more properties, start that tax clock moving again. Remember that if you're in a good market, I know that's a linear thing, it may make a few dips and whatever, but it gets to that particular point. You want to get to a point where you say, hey, I want to take my profits. I want to move on, even to take the cash. Maybe you need the cash, or do a 1031 tax deferred exchange. So thank you. Appreciate you listening to that. I hope that was instrumental in terms of how you're going to make a decision to buy or how you're going to make a decision to sell. Now we're going to go into contract to close, and we're going to start with making the right offer. So let's go through the real deal now about how you go about making an offer, buying a property, and then closing on a property. So stay tuned.